Hey, I'm Els.
And I'm Les, and together we operate Racing Heart Farm in western Wisconsin. We grow just under 2 acres of vegetables for CSA and farmers market, although this year we converted most of our farmers market sales to CSA memberships because of COVID.
We started farming on rented land, and we shared a tiller with a neighboring farmer, and we were just really unhappy with the results that we were getting from the tiller. We didn't like using it. It seemed to pulverize the soil. We knew we wanted to work with smaller tools and not have large tractors be part of our operation. And so we were that's what we were using right away, and we pretty quickly stopped doing that and tried to find alternatives. So that was, when we were renting, we were kind of looking at different tools and moved towards a broad fork rather than a tiller, and just started exploring what else we could do that seemed better for the soil.
I should say that once in the spring where we were renting, someone would come in with a tractor and spade the whole 2 acres that we were renting. And we knew, buying a tractor wasn't really something we aspired to. And then we would do kind of secondary stuff with the tiller, and that was... So when we moved here, basically, we didn't have that person readily available to come do the primary prep. And so we bought a BCS, which we use for many things, and we moved away from using the rototiller pretty quickly.
Did we ever
almost
use
immediately?
I don't think we ever used it.
Yeah, we maybe didn't use it. We bought a power harrow, which, for all of its benefits, it also does some soil disturbance. So we're trying to use that even less and less as we go forward. So we put down tarps in July, maybe, over the hay. It was just a hay field.
What kind of tarps did you use to begin with?
So these are
the
the black and white silage tarps, and actually some billboard tarps that someone had brought here for another project. So it was kind of a hodgepodge, and we just laid it down and weighed it down with cinder blocks. And so then that just sat there from July until May. The following season, so over winter and everything. Then we picked that up, put down soil amendments, broad fork, and then put compost. And that was really it. I mean, the broad forking is kind of rough going if you're going into a compacted hayfield, but they make those triangular tine broad forks for a really heavy compaction. So we have one of those, and it worked okay. Second time was definitely easier. And so it kind of raises, in a lot of areas, the beds raise themselves when you're broad forking. We do 10 5-gallon buckets per 100-foot bed. People oftentimes do a lot more than that, but we're moving all of our compost by hand. So.
And what is your compost source?
We buy it from Cow's Mo.
Okay.
So we've moved away from the silage tarps because there's no water infiltration, there's no air exchange, and you have to put something heavy hard to weigh them down.
It's very windy here.
It's very
We got tired of putting so many cinder blocks on and moving those around. We decided to move mostly to landscape fabric and staples, which are much lighter.
So after the initial clearing of the pasture or hayfield, we then use black fabric, what are they called? Landscape fabric, for a couple of different reasons. One, to sort of clear a crop after we take a crop out. If it's woody or big, we'll oftentimes flail mow it with the BCS, and then put some compost down, and then put landscape fabric on it. And if it's something like wispy, like arugula or salad mix or whatever, we don't bother with the mowing. We just add compost and cover it, and then it can really take anywhere from a couple weeks in the height of summer to kill the crop, or it can often take longer, although because it's sort of shorter growing season here in the upper Midwest, if it's not summer, sometimes we'll just leave it on. And the other thing that we use landscape fabric for is so that we don't have exposed soil over the winter. And we have enough of it that we can move it around and either have growing crop debris, cover crop, or landscape fabric on just about every bed all year. And that's kind of the idea.
That's awesome. And we definitely use it also with holes that we burn into it for certain crops that we don't want to weed. Especially some things that start out really small. Fennel, for example, always goes in landscape fabric. We don't have to look at it again until we harvest.
Set it and forget it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I feel like the weeds have been gone down significantly since we started not tilling, and I don't know that that's necessarily from not churning up the soil, but I do think it's because when we flip a bed or lay down plastic, it does a real number on perennial weeds. So we had a really bad quack grass issue, and
we still kind of battle that on our edges.
Yeah,
it's always trying to creep in, and so that's something. But
yeah. And so we oftentimes we're working on this project of narrowing our driveways, because we don't need them to be huge, and then putting down landscape fabric on top of the edge of the driveway, and then we're gonna try and plant some perennial flowers into that to be sort of an edge that shades out the quack grass. So oftentimes we will broad fork and then put down compost, and there's inevitably some weeds after we take a crop out. So if we're going from cash crop to cash crop and not using landscape fabric for occultation in between, we'll just use the wheel hoe to clear any weeds. If we had less weeds, maybe we would knife them out or use a smaller hoe, but this is kind of easy, and it loosens the soil enough that you can drag the PPT through it, vapor pot transplanter, or hand transplant into it without too much. Yeah.
And then you transplant pretty much everything with the paper pot?
No.
No.
We transplant
or
all
the little stuff.
Yeah, all the little stuff. So these kohlrabi, even those were the paper pot, the baby bok choy over there, the turnips.
So what about carrots and beets?
Beets, yes.
Okay.
but not some. I mean, and some people do transplant carrots with the paper pot, but we are not those people.
Okay.
Because we sometimes, I mean, 2 acres is maybe a little bit too big for us to really be managing. I'd like to tighten it up a little bit, but yeah, we have sometimes trouble getting the PPT things out on time.
Okay.
So carrots would not work for us.
So for carrots, you need a really nice smooth seed bed.
Yeah. I mean,
so how do you do that in a no-till system? Does it like with the tarps and everything? Do you just kind of get that seed bed?
Yeah,
or?
I think you maybe don't need as smooth of a seed bed as you think you do.
Okay.
And then we oftentimes put row cover over it so that it is holding moisture. So like if, so I think maybe why you would need an ultra smooth seed bed is so that you are planting all of your seeds at a specific depth so that the water can be with them all at the same, like for the same amount of time. But if you're putting row cover on it, it gives you a little bit, I think it gives you a little bit more flexibility with like your seed depth.
Okay. So you use broad fork, a wheel hoe, paper pot transplanter. Is there anything else that's kind of in your main
The flail mower.
set of tools? Okay.
For sure. Well, we have had issues with disease, although this year not as much as 2 years ago. Specifically in like brassicas where they just stay put if you don't do something with all that fibrous stalk.
I feel like we've kind of done a combination of things. Sometimes we'll pull out things from the field.
That's hard.
We also, we always remove like Brussels sprout stalks and some of the bigger brassicas. But that's something that we haven't quite worked out yet with disease management. We're still kind of at the beginning of figuring that out because it would be nice if we didn't need to remove anything from the field.
Yeah. I think it's easy to remove Brussels sprout stalks in the spring, but it's hard to remove broccoli stalks when you want to put something else there. So what we did with our spring broccoli, and hopefully this will aid the sort of like consumption of the broccoli stalks, is we mowed it and then we planted oats. We mowed it and then we tarped it for
A month or so.
a month, and then we planted oats, and the oats are still alive, and then they'll winter kill, and then we'll see. So when we first started here, we used the rotary plow on the BCS to raise beds, and it was inaccurate and arduous, I would say. And so these were raised in 2017 with the rotary plow, and they've sort of slumped since then. And then these were not raised, but you can see that the broad fork sort of raised this a little bit. And I'd say that the main advantage to raised beds is that you know where the bed is. And that's especially important if you are laying down like a multi-bed piece of landscape fabric. So our peppers were planted into here, and we have a 6-bed piece of fabric. We plant our peppers into the holes in that fabric, and it was very frustrating actually because it lined up in such a way that there were a few plants that we were trying to plant into the path. So I like it to be slightly raised, but I don't like to do the raising. So what has seemed to sort of work out at least enough so that you can tell where the path is broad forking and composting.
And just to, I guess, kind of reiterate the process, when are you broad forking? Are you broad forking like every time before you plant, incorporating compost as well as after, or like at what points in the season are you doing that?
As little as possible, because it's physical and it takes time. So we would do it before planting carrots every time, before planting big brassicas, so broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, every time. And then, other than that, we have like a frenzy in the spring, and then we kind of taper off, and we kind of figure if it's happened once in the season, then we're doing pretty good. And if we have to broad fork in order to harvest something, then we count it as done. So like where we're digging potatoes, we won't broad fork next time we plant, even if it's a big brassica in the spring. And where we fork for carrots, they get forked before we plant and then after, so then you're good to go for the rest of the year.
And how many times can you reuse your landscape fabric in your experience?
I don't know.
Okay, so you're still using the same landscape fabric
Yeah.
4 years later?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, and it still looks like it's in really good shape.
Yep. And I think it's more it lets water through a little bit easier after its first season, which is nice. And then, occasionally you get grass that's really desperate to grow in from the edge. And, when you're like looking at it, it's easy to just pull it up so that it doesn't stay and get bigger and really like hold down your landscape fabric.
Okay, so we had been planting our Brussels sprouts 2 rows per 30-inch bed, and we wanted to experiment with giving them more space because of disease and for airflow. And so with these beds, we decided to do 1 row and plant salad early, all at the same time in the bed with the Brussels sprouts. And after the salad came out, we weeded and laid down a thick layer of old hay, and that worked really well. Our Brussels sprouts are the best we've grown. There's little or no, almost no disease happening. And
when you say a thick layer, what does that
like
mean?
whole flakes.
Okay.
Yeah, several inches.
Yeah.
Because we didn't want weeds to then come up or anything. But
and then we didn't weed after that.
Right, we didn't weed after that, and I think the downside is that we're taking up quite a bit of space in our field. And even though we had a salad crop beforehand, it still feels like it's taking up quite a bit of space. But we have really nice Brussels sprouts, so.
Are there any differences that you immediately sense between the field with straw and then like the fields over here that have black plastic or landscape fabric?
Well, it was
talk about this again.
It was kind of a mild winter, which we hadn't had before, and we had also not had our herbs in landscape fabric before. But this is the first time we've ever had thyme and sage survive the winter. So these are our 2018 herbs that we just left because at first they were flowering and then they were huge and we didn't want to pull off the landscape fabric. And then this is a sort of the flowers here are a pollinator strip, which we plan to do every 10 or 12 beds, just a couple beds wide. And we established it into landscape fabric, but this spring we'll scythe the top growth down and pull up the landscape fabric and seed some clover or something low growing that can survive under there. And we'll probably thin out the plants too, because they don't need to do that many. And we did the same thing. If you want to see the winter squash, we did the same thing with the winter squash. minus the salad mix. So we used hay instead of fabric, landscape fabric this year. And of the 12 beds, only 2 of them had weeds in them.
I think those were the ones we mulched the earliest, and we never got back to weed. I mean, I don't think we didn't weed any of these, but those, I think we didn't do it thick enough. I feel like.
Right, we started at the top. And, yeah. So you really got to put it on